All right, so hey, this is Bill Cox with another dealer interview here, and I've got Court Gebeau from Comic Con Art, and I've hosted their site for quite some time and worked with Court for a while, and we haven't gotten to chat face to face, so I thought this would be a fun opportunity, Court, to kind of talk to you a little bit about your business. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I think like most people over the last 16, 18 months, COVID has kind of like made our businesses a little bit odd. I mean, how have you been holding up with your artists and handling the rep side of your business while you've been cooped up and not being able to get out to cons?
Honestly, I don't think it's affected me all that much. I guess that's a really good thing to say. The biggest touch and go for me was the first 3 or 4 months when publishers shut down. Because part of my, in addition to the art sales, part of my business is actually the agency side, where I help artists get work with publishers and shop their samples, manage their, negotiate their page rates, manage their deadlines, do that sort of thing. And so we lost a good deal of work when the publishers shut down. It was primarily because the comic book shops shut down, so they didn't have an outlet to sell the books. And if they didn't have a customer base for the books, why keep making them? So there was a 3 or 4 month period where they just pretty much shut down production entirely.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I forgot about the agency side of your business. So not all reps handle that side of the business for the artists that they work with, but you really do that for any of the artists that need that assistance as well.
Yeah, I think I'm fairly unique in that regard. I don't know that too many others, any others specifically that do both sides of it.
Right. I mean, they might handle appearances, but certainly not getting jobs and working with the publishers like you do. And I remember when we built your site, that was something we had to include in there with when you had the agency side of the business for an artist as well.
Right.
All right. Well, so why don't we go back to the beginning? Sorry, I jumped on that because I was just thinking about the current situation, especially since it's almost looking like it might, we might be able to go back to cons in 2022. But you've been at it for a while, but I don't really know a lot about your past as far as being an art collector or if indeed you are heavily into art collecting and what kind of steered you into the representation side of the business.
So I think the one common thread since I was maybe 5 years old is that I've always been a collector. And it started with comic books, but it's been many other things throughout the years. I remember the first time I went to a comic shop, the first book that I paid more than cover price for, I paid $8 for Amazing Spider-Man 252, the first black suit Spider-Man, when that was right when it first came out. It was pretty hot, pretty immediately.
It was
a book that I had to have. And so that's one that's just ingrained in my childhood. But I've always collected, and comic books were the biggest part of that throughout my youth into high school. And then I got back into it when the first X-Men movie came out. I remember that was really intriguing to me. And then I got really heavily into it again. And as far as my business is concerned, I was on eBay pretty early on. And there was an eBay Comics chat board at the time. Like in the early days, they actually had chat boards for all these different hobbies. And I made a lot of friends through that, and we would meet up at conventions and do that sort of thing. And one of the guys that I knew through the chat was Scott Kress of Catskill Comics. He reps Mike Rell and Ron Frenz and some of those guys.
Yeah.
So we became good friends, and I found it was ironic to me that Scott really didn't have a background in comics. He had a background in buying and selling things and going to flea markets and garage sales and always looking for a deal that he could sell something on eBay, that sort of thing. But he lived down the street from a couple of comic artists, I believe an inker. I can't remember what his name was. And he started selling art for him as a favor. And then that was going well enough that inker then referred him to guys like Mike Rell and Ron Frenz. And then he ended up building a whole business out of this. And he really didn't have much knowledge about comics per se, right? So I thought, wow, this is the perfect job that I never knew existed that I would love to have. And why does my buddy Scott have it when he doesn't know comic books and I have all this random comic knowledge that I can't use? Yeah, so I had it in the back of my mind that I'd like to do something like that. And at the time I was living in San Diego, and I was running an ad in the local free paper, the San Diego Reader, about selling stuff on consignment for people through, on eBay.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the people that contacted me, his name was Jason Rodriguez, and he had been an inker in the industry for over 10 years, did a lot of DC stuff with Scott Benefiel, I guess.
Mhm.
And he was no longer working in comics, but he had a stack of art that he wanted to sell. And at about the same time, I met Juan Ferreira, who was working on his very first book for Image Comics called Small Gods. And I asked him if he might be interested in working with me for art sales. And so I started my website with exactly two artists, one who was on his very first book and one who was no longer in the industry. It was a pretty potent lineup. So then,
Now, with your site though, out of curiosity, did you make it yourself, or did you, work with a
yes,
third party?
I had taken some courses in programming, and so I knew the rudimentary web design stuff. So I did build my first site myself.
Mhm.
And not too long after that, Scott was contacted by the Ed Venice studio about working with him to sell art on eBay for the artist that Ed Venice was training. So it was not an offer to work with Ed. In fact, they were pretty adamant about the fact that Ed did not want to work with an art rep. He just wanted an outlet for these artists who had never been published before to be able to generate some income selling pinups and stuff.
Sure.
And so at the time, Scott was doing pretty well on his own. He had a bunch of established artists. He didn't really want to take on the extra work of selling $10 and $20 and $30 pinups in bulk. But he said, well, this is at least a way to add some more names to your site. If you'd be interested in doing this, it'll at least fill it out a little bit. And it's not going to be a lot of money, but it might lead to other opportunities. I said, yeah, that's a great idea. He put them in touch with me. And so there were a couple artists that were had been published a little bit, like Ron Adrian and Mariah Venice. But for the most part, it was just students. And so they would send me a package of art once a month or so, and I would just dump it all on eBay, rinse and repeat. And I mean, it was not high end stuff, but it was just they were generating a decent amount of income just through volume sales. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, Ed Venice would include one of his pinups in the package, and he would be very adamant about what he wanted to get for it. So he'd say, "Oh, here's a black cat pinup. I want you to sell this for me, but do not take a penny less than $250. If you can't get $250, I don't want to sell it," or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so that happened once or twice, and each time that happened, he would get back to me and say, "Oh, did the black cat sell or whatever?" And he really didn't understand his own market, which was the interesting thing. He had a set valuation in his head, but he really didn't know what his stuff was selling for. So he'd say, "Did you get $250?" I said, "No, I didn't. I got $400 or whatever it was." I was getting him more than he asked for. And then he's like, "Fine, you know what? Just price my art and here's some more of it." That led to me representing him full time. And because he was an established talent, that made it easier for me to, land some other established artists that opened the door. And, one thing led to another. And gradually I built out the site. And then I guess the next major turning point was 2008, somewhere in there. Ed Venice had been working with an agency in Brazil for all of his professional work, and he wanted to potentially offer those services for the artists that he was training, and he didn't want to go through that same agency. So he asked me if I would be interested in being his agent, and then also the agent for the artists that he was training. And at the time, I didn't even understand fully what that entailed. Like, I didn't know what the responsibilities were. I didn't know what I would be doing. But I knew if I wanted to continue to grow my business, this was a great opportunity. And the only smart answer was yes. And I'd figure out the rest. And it ended up being a really cool, it dovetailed very nicely with the art sales, because on the front end, if you can get your artist a good project, you'll only benefit even more on the back end by having desirable art that's easy to sell.
Yeah.
So that's worked out really well. And so there are artists that I do the art sales for, there are artists that I do agency for, and there are artists that I do both. I sort of just have a list of services that are offered, and artists can pick and choose, what's useful to them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, that's it makes a lot of sense, and it gives you basically the heads up of what's going to be coming down the sales channel 3-4 months, 6 months out, because you're controlling what the projects are, at least helping fashion what those projects are. That's a good position to be in.
Yeah, it's a nice perk to get to see a lot of the art, as it's being created, going back and forth for approvals and all of that. So it's sort of nice to be a little bit behind the curtain in that sense.
So you've got relationships then, at all the major publishers then, just because of what you've been doing. That's great. That's you can't say a lot of guys approach it like that, and so that's very, very, very unique in our business. And because a lot of guys I know, not all people are doing artist representation full time. I mean, there are quite a few, and the ones that are doing really well definitely do. But I couldn't see, you'd have to be committed, especially with the number of artists you have. You've pretty much got to devote 40 hours a week plus, I'm sure, to taking care of all of that.
Yeah, it gradually evolved. It was funny because when I started it was very part-time, obviously. Early on, you don't have a ton to do. And at the time, I was actually dealing poker at a card room in San Diego. And I would go in every day, and they would always overstaff. So there would be 10 shifts, but they would schedule 14 people just to make sure that, there's always a full roster of all the tables are covered.
Mm-hmm.
And you would draw a number out of a pill bottle. And based on the number, the number one would get first choice of what table they wanted to start at, and then you work your way down the list. And if they overbooked, you would have the opportunity to take an out, like to go home instead, or to play, or whatever you wanted to do. But you could opt out of the day if they had overbooked and you were early enough on the list and there were still spots available. So when I started my business, if my rule of thumb was always, if I have enough work at home to do for my own business, I'd rather work for me than for them.
Sure.
And so every opportunity when I had enough work at home and I could opt out, I did. And so one day I showed up and a friend was like, Court, when was the last time you actually dealt a hand of poker? I had to think about it. He's like, you've been showing up for months and I can't remember the last time you worked a shift. And I'm like, that's a good point. Maybe I don't quite need this job anymore. And I finally, removed the safety net and committed full time to comic art. So, and I mean, I started Comic-Con art in the fall of 2004. So it's been 17 years now, and it's been very good. The funny thing was, for a number of years, I had a hard time accepting it as a true career choice. It always felt more like a hobby or more like a cheat in some ways. Like, I didn't work for anyone. I was at home all the time doing what I wanted to do, setting my own schedule. And I had friends who had, big office jobs, or a friend who was a contractor that was doing really well in the real estate market and all that sort of thing. And I'm like, I don't know if I can rely on this long term, or, if I need to grow up at some point and do something more responsible. And then the housing market crashed in 2008, and I saw my contractor friend, who I thought was very well established, he lost almost everything.
Yeah.
And people that were supposedly, more established in real world jobs than I was, they were having difficulty, and I was the one that was getting by. And I'm like, okay, that was when I was like, this is a real job and I need to respect it as such. And that was eye-opening.
Yeah, that was an interesting time, because I remember thinking that we were going to see drops in sales and that sort of thing, but everything pretty much remained steady. We didn't see the market, increase in value per se, or, the artworks, weren't growing in value that way, but it leveled off. It didn't drop. We didn't see the same kind of impact that you saw, across the nation, with with so many people losing their jobs and all the difficulties that were going on at that same time. The comic art market stood strong, and you can look at it and compare it to kind of where we've been at the last 14, 16 months. I was super concerned when COVID started. That's why we did that first Comic Art Live show in May. I was like, I'm going to help the dealers that want to, try to do something special, or, and it turned out we didn't even need it because look at the way the market's gone since the collectibles markets have gone since this started. So yeah, it's definitely a good business to be in. But I get where you were coming from, because there's many times when I've questioned, my choice to be involved in comic art fans and having that be my full-time job too. It's like, how can you look at this and quantify it to your friends and your family, at least outside of the house, to my mom and everybody, they don't really see it. They think you're in a hobby, right? That you're not supposed to be able to make a living at something that you really enjoy being a part of. So yeah, it's great. I mean, I'm so happy that, that's where you're at, and that's where you're at then. I mean, I think for all of us, it never feels like work, right? When you're doing something you love all the time. So yeah,
that's probably the most important thing in life, is to have a job that you love. I mean, it makes everything better.
It does.
But, it's fun. My wife, one of her favorite jokes is that when she met me, all she knew was that I had a cat and I liked comic books. And she's like, and we still got through it.
Oh boy. Yeah, I've always been a cat person too. So that's probably about what Maureen could say about me when we met as well. So okay. So how have you seen things change in the last, say, 10 years? I mean, I know some of your artists are digital too. So, I mean, has the art sales side of your business changed a great deal from, like, say, 2010 to now, just in the way that technology's changed and the artists that you represent, has evolved?
Yeah, I think that's actually probably been the single biggest shift, right? The number of artists that are working, at least in some manner, digitally. I mean, I guess it started with, the scanning of pencils and then inking on blue lines. Like, that was the first shortcut in terms of, like, not sending all the boards all over the world where the inker had to work over the original pencils.
Mm-hmm.
But then, especially with, the advent of digital platforms like the Cintiq or whatever, and all of these drawing tablets and that sort of thing, it saves a lot of time for the artists. It allows them often to accomplish certain effects that would be much harder to render by, simply by hand.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it's obviously been a major shift. Initially, it was just a couple of guys, and then you just start to notice that more and more are working digitally, or at least partially digitally. And now it feels like it's getting much closer to 50-50 almost.
It does. I agree. I feel if we're not there, we're almost there. Certainly by the end of the year, there are so many artists. And I get it. I mean, schedules are tough, right? I mean, traditional artists, it takes a little bit more effort to get that work done. And if you can get a shortcut to get your job done, then I don't hold it against the artists at all. I mean, as collectors, we can kind of lament, artists not choosing to work traditionally anymore. But at the end, you have to respect their decision on the way they want to work, because it's just, if it fits their schedules better. I mean, I've heard creators say that at the end of the day, they're happy, they're able to spend more time with family because they work digitally. I mean, at some point you have to kind of weigh the money versus the time and choose what's most appropriate for you at that moment. So so it's an interesting time with all of that. And there's always lots of discussion about monoprints and NFTs and where the hobby's going. And I don't think anything is really quite shaken out completely, and everybody knows what the next 5 years are going to look like. But yeah, so for you, it's definitely, you've seen the change, and it's been a part of for you, and as their agent too. I mean, you have to look at it both sides. So you want to make sure they can deliver their projects on time, and hopefully there's something tangible to sell in some way after the projects have been published and out to the public. So
and I think for the vast majority of artists, even if they're doing really well on art sales, the first priority is always the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a job. It's so whatever enables them to meet the deadline and deliver the best work, that's going to be the first priority. So even if they leave some money on the table in the terms of art sales, that's how most artists seem to be making that decision right now. It's definitely been a paradigm shift in terms of, asking the question, what is original art?
Mm-hmm.
And I, having been involved in the contemporary fine art scene as a collector as well, I mean, art is what the artist says it is. At least in fine art, that's very much accepted.
Mm-hmm.
So there are artists that work exclusively in the print medium, and we're not talking about one of ones necessarily. We're talking about, an edition of 3 or 5 or 100 or whatever it is, and the print is the artwork. So in that sense, it's actually like comic art is finally starting to appreciate that definition of artwork that's already been established to some extent in the fine art world. And when I first started working with digital artists for art sales and the monoprints, one comment I would often hear is, from the old school collectors who want ink over pencil on the same board, preferably. I kept hearing, well, if I'm a Jack Kirby collector, I want original Joe Sinnott inks over Jack Kirby pencils.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought that was an interesting comment, because what I think a lot of collectors don't actually, either they don't know or they might not even be aware of it. Joe Sinnott, as the final step of his ink work over Jack Kirby, was always to go through and erase all of Jack Kirby's pencils from the board.
Right.
Because he wanted it to be clean inks. So, technically there are no more pencils there.
Right.
But, it's still the idea of, like, I know that Jack was bent over
that paper. Right. Exactly.
Over it, all of that. So it's just interesting, because at the very least, the shift to digital has really made everyone as a collector reevaluate what they consider to be art.
Right.
And, if you choose to only collect traditional inks over pencils, that's a very valid choice. I get it. But I do think a lot of collectors are starting to expand to a more broader sense of what art can be.
Right. I mean, I think they have to. It's more I'm an old school art collector too. And, when I first thought of NFTs and buying a monoprint, I guess, it's funny. When I think about it, I think I'd be more open to buying an NFT than a monoprint. I don't know why, but because I see the NFT as art, and there's the whole provenance that can be established through that, and the benefit to the artist long term, depending on contract setup with those as well. There's something about that I find more appealing than buying a print, whether it's remarked or signed, and even if it's a one of one. I don't know, and that's just me. I'm sure there are a lot of collectors who feel NFTs are like the last thing they'd want, and they'd buy a monoprint before that. But that's, as somebody who I went to art school, and that's my background, and I can see how owning an NFT would make a lot of sense to me down the road. I mean, until I'd want to see it in its final form and presentation and everything once we're able to get to that point. But I find that far more intriguing than the monoprint side of the world. But again, it's to each their own. I mean, I think anything that brings new collectors into the hobby, because you're representing a lot of guys that young comic readers are experiencing comic books for the first time with those creators. And if monoprints are the only way that they can actually purchase originals from those people, that's all they're going to know coming into the hobby. And I think anything that gets people excited and is able to bring them into the hobby is a good thing. So while some of those things may not be for me or for other collectors, I think we all have to accept the fact that they're necessary, and eventually it might be 60-40 digital to traditional, right? And then at that point, there's the market is dwindling for what we can actually own that's traditionally done. I mean, at some point we'll have to evolve a little bit into accepting something that's different.
I think you touched upon exactly what is happening for most collectors is, at some point they're going to love the work of an artist who only works digitally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sorry, like traditional pen and ink is off the table. So this is what your options are, whether it's an NFT or whether it's a monoprint. And if you want to own a piece of their work, you just need to decide if you're interested in that or not. And I had one collector who absolutely loved Jorge Jimenez's run on Justice League, and he was buying a lot of the monoprints. And he actually said to me, it was definitely a transition for him to accept monoprints as art. But he said to me, growing up, his two favorite comic artists of all time were George Perez and Neil Adams, and Jorge's work is on that level for him right now. And so he just had to support it in any way that he could. And he sent me pictures. His walls are lined with Jorge's, some of his best Justice League monoprints, and it's just really cool to see that.
Right. Well, like you said, I mean, everybody. I think that it'll be interesting to see the shift over the next 10 years, because I think more and more artists are going to be going this route, and it's unavoidable. So we as collectors have to kind of move with it, or it'll just be limiting what we can buy if we were focused only on the traditional pen and ink.
And this is something that we're seeing in many other hobbies as well. It's not just comic art. It's just, how things shift with time. And the older generation is always going to have this preconceived notion of what something is or isn't or should be. And the younger generation isn't necessarily going to relate to that. The younger generation today is growing up in a digital age where everything is digital. Everything is on their phone. Their music catalog is on their phone. The shows they want to watch are on their phone. Like everything they want to do is essentially on their phone. Mm-hmm. So if they can carry their collection on their phone too, they're not opposed to that. Yeah. It's just a definite, shift in viewpoint, and it's interesting to see. But again, it happens in every hobby. I mean, every generation sort of gets timed out of something at a certain point, like even to the point where things that were really desirable and collectible years ago might not have any collector base now. Like I remember, my grandmother's generation or my mom and dad, when they were growing up, in their houses, a lot of people collected those little Hummel figures from Germany, the little cute.
Oh yeah.
And like everybody had them and they were everywhere. And like, now nobody cares. Like just the collector base that cared for that has aged out.
Right. Well, it probably won't happen with, traditional art, but like you said, every interest change, right? I mean, that's the main thing. And in that world, yeah, Hummels are probably not as desirable as they once were. I mean, I remember, lots of different figurines, birds, different things that my grandmother had collected that I actually have a few sitting around here gathering a lot of dust, because that's my memories of my grandmother. But I bet if I was to try to sell them on eBay, I probably wouldn't get much for them, unfortunately.
Well, I have one as well same thing. I have it. It was a memento from my grandmother. No, I'm definitely not saying that the market for traditional art will fade. Not even the slightest. I'm just saying the resistance to monoprints and NFTs is going to diminish with this digital generation.
Oh yeah,
doesn't have this same connection with tangible things.
Right. Oh no, I mean I've got a 16 and 18-year-old daughters who are just going to planning on going to college. But as far as art goes, I mean, they still sketch in their sketchbooks with a pencil, but they both have their pen tablets and are as accustomed to working that way as they are working in their sketchbook when they're trying to work out ideas. And yeah, if that's about all they're and I can see them just abandoning the physical sketchbook because it's so much easier to take their iPad with them and work on that, versus carrying the sketchbook around with them. It's lighter, it's smaller, it's harder to lose, all those reasons. And yeah, the younger generation isn't going to think about art in the same way that we do. So yeah, I mean, so it's good. So, I mean, so you're just in a unique position because you're marketing it at the same time as it's happening and having to explain it and help collectors adjust. So you're playing a very important role in the process of kind of helping people segue into this new paradigm, this new concept. I mean, once NFTs become more standard, that'll be something you won't be able to avoid it. You'll have to become a part of it in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, future wise, I mean, do you do a lot of conventions as far as going out to sell in person, or is it pretty much the majority of your sales occur all mail order?
The majority is definitely online. I definitely did more shows early on, and that has tapered off over the years, mostly just because of having a family and not wanting to travel as much. But generally, I was still doing 2 to 3 shows a year pre-COVID. I was always doing New York Comic Con. That was set in stone. And then I would make the rounds and either do C2E2 in Chicago or Emerald City in Seattle or San Diego. But with those other shows, I wasn't usually doing back-to-back years.
Right.
Because I had done that for a while. And what I started to see was sort of a law of diminishing returns. When you're showing up the same show with some of the same artists year after year, a lot of the customer base has already had that opportunity to get that commission or buy that art. And so we were doing better by changing it up.
Mm-hmm.
Cities we were visiting.
So do you think going forward, you'll still try to do 2 or 3 shows a year once shows come back? I mean, 2022.
Definitely New York was always my favorite.
Yeah, mine too.
It felt very close in size to San Diego, but much more comic centric. San Diego is much more of a, general pop culture, TV, movies, all of that. So for me, New York was really the most fun. Both, it was great as a dealer, but it was also a lot of fun on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely like to go back there and then see how it goes. This year, even when they were offering space, I was not interested. And part of it was just the uncertainty of where we would be, but also they didn't know. They didn't know what the capacity would be. They didn't know what they were selling. And yet, there was no discount, So
no, they raised their prices, in fact, I think.
Are the same. Your table expenses are the same, but we don't know if we're going to have 100% capacity or 15%.
Mm-hmm.
No, thanks.
Well, just from that selling point alone, I think most sellers, we're not gonna go. I mean, I've talked with a few guys who are still on the fence. Even it's a month away at this point, and they still haven't made their payments and are still, But I get it. I mean, I'm kind of surprised they're still going forward with it. To be honest, I think
I'm very surprised that it hasn't been canceled yet.
Yeah, I mean, well, I just got an email saying that more badges have opened for sale about 2 hours ago. So there's, and they announced John Cena as a guest all, 4 days. So, and that was like 2 days ago. So they're actively promoting it. But I would just think that that's not, I don't know. You don't want to see a business suffer. And there's got to be a lot of revenue that they've been losing since COVID started. But it just seems like the most prudent thing to do for a show that size would be to wait.
I will still be surprised. I mean, I know that they're still planning on doing it and it's a month out. I will still be surprised if it happens.
Right, because all they need is a spike in New York and, over what they've already had, and they'd almost have to cancel it.
And Javits has already canceled other conventions. Like there was an auto show that was supposed to happen there a month or 2 ago when there were less cases, and that got canceled. So
exactly, and that was after people shipped their cars to it. It's just imagine how costly that was, because I think they canceled it like a week before the show was supposed to happen. So all these people who needed to exhibit spent all this money to get their stuff there, and then that would happen. And I mean, can you imagine if that's you have all these dealers who actually ship their material to the Javits, only to find out that the show gets canceled? I mean, there would be lawsuits out the wazoo.
I mean, unless for some reason you have to go, like, why take the risk?
Yeah.
From the health standpoint, from a financial standpoint, from the uncertainty of it all, it just, I'll wait another year and hope for that.
No, you'll do more online that weekend for sure.
Right.
No, I totally agree. Well, I polled people last night on my CAF update, asking them about that weekend. Are you going or not? And I think 10% of the people said they were going, and Maybe 10 were maybes who had tickets but were contemplating not going because for health concerns. And then 80% said they weren't, because we're planning on doing something that weekend. I'm not quite sure what, but I just feel like with art collectors and so many creators aren't even going to go to the shows. I mean, they're already canceling. If they committed in the summer, they're backing out now too. So it's just not. I think the opportunity is to do something online that weekend that's kind of fun. I mean, Felix always does something. He's done something big, with his San Diego show and his New York show. So we may end up doing something that weekend too, just to fill the gap that people are, they want something. But so we'll put on a few hour show or something like that, sell some art. But let's see. So you're correct me if I'm wrong. You said you were in Nashville, right? I'm pretty sure that's right.
Yeah. Yes.
So you moved from the West Coast to Nashville. How long ago have you been based out of there?
I moved to Atlanta in 2008 because I wanted to own a house in San Diego. It was too pricey for me at the time, and Atlanta had always been on the short list of cities that I was excited about. So I kind of moved there just blind. It's just sort of an adventure. And when I was in Atlanta, I met my wife through a mutual friend. My wife Shannon had come down for a friend's birthday, and we had met that way. And eventually we started dating long distance, and she would come to Atlanta for a weekend and I would come to Nashville for a weekend, and that got old pretty quick. And it's not far, it's 4 hours, but it's far.
Oh yeah.
And I had the flexibility, one of the nice things of this job is I have the flexibility of basically I can live anywhere in the US that I want to. All I need is an internet connection for the most part. And she was a CPA for Caterpillar Financial. So I moved to Nashville, and I'm glad I did, because now I much prefer Nashville to Atlanta.
Oh no, I've been to Nashville many times. I love Nashville. So that's an awesome place to live. So yeah. And I've been to Atlanta a few times, and I've never been too impressed. I mean, I know the people that live in that area love it, but I'd pick Nashville over Atlanta any day.
Same.
So, all right. Well, that's great. I mean, so that's probably going to be your base of operations for a while, I imagine then.
Yeah, we have 2 young girls now. Hattie is 8 and Charlotte is 5, and they love it here too. And we're in a great neighborhood, great school system, love our house, love our friends. So I don't see us, there's no temptation to move anytime soon, if ever.
Well, I envy you. That's what we were talking before we got started. That's where I'm at now, is moving. And it's like, I want it wherever I move. I told my wife, it's got to be a place where I know I want to spend like the next 20 years. I want to feel like I want to stay there. And so it's got to be the right house in the right spot, in the right community. And it's tough, but yeah, I'm glad you found that, because I'm envious of that.
It was a happy accident, because the funny thing is I actually lived in Tennessee for 8 years when I was very young. My parents moved here when I was 2 for a job, and we lived in Johnson City, which is the far northeast tip of the state. Mm-hmm. And I loved it as a kid, but we moved again back up north. My family was all from outside of the Philadelphia area mostly. We moved back up north when I was 10. So I grew up in the Northeast and never, ever even thought Tennessee would be on my radar. That was, I was there when I was a kid once, and that was the South, and I don't live in the South. I'm a Northeastern guy. And yeah, it's just very funny that this is where I ended up, and I couldn't be happier here.
Well, congratulations. Well, listen, it's been a lot of fun talking, Court. And, if there's ever anything I can do for you, just let me know. I mean, we run announcements for Comic-Con art all the time, but if there's anything I can help you with ever, please let me know. Be happy to do it. And if I ever need anything from you, I'll be certain to reach out and ask for help, because there's always stuff that I'm trying to understand better. And I know that, now that I know kind of the direction you're moving with the guys you're repping and everything, if I've got questions about NFTs, or if I ever want to do a group discussion, maybe we can, you could join me on something that I do online where we can answer questions for people to help everybody better understand some of the things that are happening in the hobby. It would be good to have knowledgeable people versus people who are speculating about where things are going, to talk about those sorts of things in the future.
Sure, that'd be great. And thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun. I hope you have a great holiday weekend.
You do the same.
potential move.